Thank you very much, Christian, and thank you for inviting me. I've not got a PowerPoint presentation, but I'll be very brief and concise so that those who are a bit hungry, being 12:30, Christian, a bit cheeky not giving everyone a biscuit 10 minutes ago, but I'm sure between us we can keep things moving. I think Christian's campaign so far is showing a high level of organisation, which is great, and a level of serious debate which actually really tries to subvert what we think of as a mayoral role, which has somehow become a kind of a presidential style thing, when actually we know, as people who are bringing families up and so on in London, that we actually need to tackle some very, very serious issues. And it's not just about hanging on a zip wire and being funny, it is actually tackling some really serious issues. Otherwise we will have long-term problems in this city which we all love. So as Christian said, I have just stepped down as being the leader of Islington Council, and I chaired the Transport Committee for 4 years, and Christian was great at the beginning of that 4 years, coming along to speak to all the borough leads on transport about what were the key issues facing Londoners. And one of the things which Christian challenged us about at that point in time back in 2010 was 20-mile-an-hour zones, and Islington of course was the first borough to introduce 20-mile-an-hour zones. And it's really nice that that is not just a Labor thing. Actually, Richmond is now looking at it for the whole borough, and the City of London, which is not known for its Labor representation, is also looking at that. So that's one thing whereby we could actually have a policy, day one, all of inner London, the inner donut of London, to be 20-mile-an-hour zone. So I think, we're really winning an argument there, and I think that's also down to really strong transport campaigners like Christian over the years. I'm going to talk about big picture things because you've had a good session on transport, and obviously I'll start sort of with my council leader hat on. The thing everybody comes to see you about, regardless of whether you're a member of Parliament or a councillor, is housing. That's housing management, but also the affordability questions. And it's really good to see that even the Evening Standard, which is also not known for its Labor position on many questions, is actually now getting behind looking at housing solutions. And obviously when the 50% affordable aim under Ken Livingstone went up in smoke in 2008, we then ended up having this sort of borough relationship kind of under the table, no lack of transparency approach, whereby boroughs just do what they like and they don't actually have to be accountable back to the London plan, which says 50% of all homes should be affordable. So that would be the first thing that I would be encouraging Christian, if he were the Mayor of London, to adopt, back to the 50% affordable target. And you will have developers screaming and shouting, but that is what we actually have to deal with. We have to stand up to the developers and say 50% affordable. And it's what you do in best practice in boroughs. I've had the developers around my table, and the most annoying thing is when it gets too tough and they say 50% affordable is not affordable in a place like Islington. If you're a property developer and you can't make money in Islington, then I think there's a problem with your business model. But I guess the most important thing as an elected representative is then that gets taken off your table and goes straight to the Mayor, because they're not getting the answer that they want. And I think we've really got to have that argument as a city. Somebody's got to stand on that platform, say 50% affordable homes, and people have got to vote in that policy so that then the Mayor can't just quietly decide everything back at City Hall, because that's exactly what's happening with a very large development at the moment in the Royal Mail site on the corner of Farringdon Road, which many of you will know, which as soon as Crossrail is finished will be worth millions and millions and millions of pounds for each tiny little flat. And basically that has been taken off Islington and Camden's desks, even though we've been very strong and said this is our policy of 50% affordable homes, and now it looks like the Mayor will probably give them maybe 12% affordable homes. So we are talking big arguments and having the confidence to say this is what we need for London. So I'll be encouraging you in that direction, Christian. Number 2, jobs. We need the London living wage for all employers. That's it. I don't want to hear arguments about retail can't afford it, leisure can't afford it. I myself brought that in 2010 in Islington, and the way I did it, I brought in the contractors as the contract was coming up, and I said, now we expect everybody to be paid £8.80 an hour, which is the London living wage. And there were so many arguments as to why, but as the window closed between when the contract was going to be let again, suddenly the money was found. And actually, when the people senior in the organisation who I spoke to said, I would just say, do you know how much £8.80 is an hour? And do you know how much rent is in London? They soon worked out the maths of it. And now we're in a position where if you speak to people in the city who run the corporation, they say the number one thing that businesses say about setting up in London, cost of living, the fact that wages can't pay for rent and so on. So that's the living wage just should be non-negotiable, and it's something that we just have to make happen. The corollary of that, of course, is keeping rents affordable. And that's why target rents in council housing, that's why in the end we keep saying the 50% and social housing, because that's the thing that's the most efficient to produce. Council housing is an extremely efficient way of producing large numbers of homes for people to live in over the shortest period of time. So it's not necessarily a kind of straight down the line ideological position, although that's quite attractive to some people. It's that that is the most efficient way of quickly producing a large number of units which people can afford to rent. And then deciding who gets those is obviously another debate that needs to happen across the piece, but that is certainly the most efficient way. Quickly on education and public services, you'd all be aware that the issue should not be about whether we spend millions of pounds on one free school in one particular borough which happens to be in fashion. It's about the fact that in the east of London, in Barking and Dagenham, we have teachers teaching classes which are well over 30 students, and that in the very young age group we have small children of 4 and 5 where there are 10 classes of 30 children. That's schools where there are 300 children in 1 year. So you probably went to a 2-form entry school. These are 10 forms of entry. So I think we just need to get our head around the population growth and get our head around the challenge in education. It is partly about governance, structure and all the things which actually we debate at length in the Labour Party, but it's also just about problem solving. How do we educate 300 4-year-olds in one school in Barking and Dagenham? So we just need to remember the scale that we're talking about in London and remember who Londoners are and what their needs are. Also just on health, the debate around hospitals, I just think we should keep all of our hospitals and we should debate locally what sorts of services we want in them. And we shouldn't be selling any of them off because all of them can be doing aged care. We're all living much longer. We should be thinking about different models. But I think what upsets people a lot is to see that the place that they were born in or the place that they've gone to visit a relative in just disappears. And I think we need to hang on to all of our hospital spaces, but we need to have a debate about step-down care, about using some of the sites for housing our nurses and doctors. But we should just keep all those buildings intact because we waste far too much political energy in having debates about buildings when we should be talking about the services. But if we just stopped saying we would sell off this, that and the other because the real estate's so good, we're going to make so much money, we've got to think much more long term and think that those buildings should be kept for public use and that should be kept for a health purpose. And within that, there are lots of health purposes where we do still need buildings, but they're mainly on public health issues rather than necessarily the acute side. Just finally on transport, I don't know if you touched on this, Christian, I didn't hear it mentioned, the Freedom Pass. Wonderful scheme, paid for by the boroughs, promoted by the mayor, and just to say it does cost boroughs an enormous amount to do that, but we've all got to always stand up for it because it's just the most wonderful scheme for everyone's mental health. And I think if we can just keep that going, I can see everybody sort of over about the age of 60 nodding their heads. But obviously, when I first came into the transport role as the lead councillor for transport in London, there was a huge debate with the Tories about whether this would just disappear because we couldn't afford it, and I just think we can't talk like that. We have to stand for something, and I think we have to stand for the Freedom Pass and the fact that it gives older folk and people with disabilities a way of getting around London and enjoying all the wonderful things that London has and the way that it's just constantly changing and being new. Christian, I couldn't leave without just saying on policing that the biggest issue, biggest problem with policing, once again, it went out with Ken Livingstone and just has never really returned, a debate about diversity. We should have a London police force which looks like the London it serves. Currently, if you look at where people come from, it's all Hertfordshire or Kent, and that's because of, once again, price. Islington Council has looked at housing for police officers to get around that argument, but I don't think it's about that. I think it's about culture. I think it's about the fact that the police force doesn't think that Londoners can police themselves. And I think we need to be much more out there about that and much more definite about that and make it happen. And we also need an independent, a genuinely independent police commissioner. That is to say, somebody who looks at complaints properly. Because at the moment it's far too circular. The police look at it, then another policeman looks at it, another policeman, and this is really not doing anything for trust. There is a big issue with trust and the police, and we need to deal with that by having a genuinely independent group of people who look at police complaints. And until we do that, I just do not think that we're ever going to get over all of our scandals, which have been going on way back since Stephen Lawrence was killed, but probably before that as well. Water cannon is not the answer. I do not believe that. I think that's a failure of politics. Using water cannon is a complete failure of politics, and I think all of us should be standing up against it. Watch my Twitter feed, because I have been all this week. Obviously the police teams, which Ken Livingstone introduced, they must be also part of building up that trust in the police. I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for inviting me, Christian, and good luck. And we look forward to being part of you as you go forward.
Thank you.